In a world obsessed by algorithms and data, Story Islands is a space for serendipity and connection. Steve Jobs famously said, "You can only trace the dots backwards." And in that spirit, in this podcast, we talk to people whose lives have navigated the not always linear route through media, technology, audience connection, innovation, and creativity. We ask them to share 5 story islands, people, places, themes from their life and work, and then we navigate them in order or out of order to find the connections and perhaps by not taking the linear route, uncover some unexpected things along the way. If you're listening to this as a linear podcast on Spotify or a regular podcast platform, you'll experience it as it unfolds in real time. But if you are watching the interactive Stornaway, you can choose in which order you move through the story islands. I was struggling to write an intro for my guest today. I've known him literally my whole life. So, in the spirit of embracing new technology, I asked my robot friend ChatGPT to help. I was given 3 options: playful but polished, charming and lightly self aware, and humorous but still respectful. So, I've settled on a hybrid. David Dimbleby, also known as my dad, spent over 50 years at the BBC, shaping how the UK watched politics, culture, and major national moments. He's been a familiar face and voice in British media for decades, hosting the BBC's election coverage, fronting big cultural programmes, and generally being the person that people turn to when the nation is having a moment. In fact, since he stopped chairing Question Time, the lively weekly debate show where politicians and the public confront each other, the question, "Where is David Dimbleby when you need him?" is never far from people's lips. For American listeners, this is from ChatGPT. Imagine the calm, unflappable anchor who appears during every major election night. And then imagine he also makes documentaries about everything from democracy to tattoos. I can't say I'm not a tiny bit nervous to be interviewing the interviewer, but in the spirit of Story Islands, I'm going to bring him into the room and see what happens.
I can't tell you how nervous the interviewed is to be interviewed by his daughter.
The good news is this isn't really an interview because I did my research and I was reading your autobiography.
It
Keep
wasn't an
talking.
autobiography. It was a book about broadcasting.
Okay.
It didn't describe my relationship with you, for instance, over the years, which would be a book in itself.
Luckily for the audience, we're not going to go into that today. And it's an interesting subject, the way in which your public and private have played out, but that may be for our next Story Islands. But I found this quote when I was looking through and trying to get some ideas of how I might talk to you. And and it might take us into our first Story Island, which is, there was a quote that said, "Gaming an interview is the key to having any chance of prizing even a half-true reply from your prey. It is fun playing different roles and trying out different wordings and constructions for the same question. What will they answer if I ask this? How about if I put it like that?" Which kind of made me go, oh, is it going to be this kind of interview? But it's not, because it's Story Islands and it's a gentle conversation with my father. But it does help lead us into your Story Islands. So classically, not a man to be boxed in. I asked you for 5 Story Islands. The first thing you said was, I can't think of any. And the second thing you said was, I've got 7. So for the audience's benefit watching the linear documentary, the linear podcast, these 7 Story Islands are family favorites, holiday films, Anglia TV, Bristol news and discussion programs, major row over Wilson, South Africa, Question Time and discussion programs, and then now.
I mean, I would have done many more. I didn't understand the idea of islands because I don't see my life as having islands in the way you tried to make me do it. That's why I resisted. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll just mark events in my life and we can talk to those. They're not islands in the sense that each of them completely changed the way I saw the world or saw broadcasting, but they are moments. They're significant moments.
No, and I think, everybody's come up with totally different ways of seeing it. I think it's quite interesting that you've done that because again, the only bit of knowledge I'll share about you is that you're not a man prone to introspection. You are out there moving through life, not questioning too much the past. You are moving through. And I think probably the most interesting thing to help me with this, interviewing my father for the first time ever, age 52, I actually asked the Stornaway team to come up with some questions. So some really interesting themes kind of came up around the audience and media and storytelling, which I think kind of your Story Islands can help us with. So I'm going to jump straight in and I get to choose, I think. Is that okay?
All right, okay. I just dispute that I'm very introspective. I spend my whole time muttering to myself.
Well, maybe you don't share your introspections.
That would be true.
I think well, we might talk about that. So I was going to go straight to now because I don't want to start from the beginning, and I don't want to run out of time. So I was going to go to the now Story Island, and I think you have a unique perspective on what is happening on the landscape now, where I would say trust, audience, media are probably kind of at the forefront of everyone's minds. And I was just interested to know, and so were my team, about whether you've ever felt anything like this in terms of the public's trust in media, the way in which people are relating to their politicians, the role of technology. And it's a big question, but I wondered where you were.
Well, I mean, I agree with what underlies that question, that we're in a chaotic world, and the chaos is exemplified by and magnified by social media and the way people say anything about anything as though they knew all about it, and the way people are insulted and hurt and cancelled and damaged by it, and the way that Trump uses it, full of lies and half-truths and outrageous remarks. But the last one, the Democrats, who deserve to be executed for opposing his will. It's just, we're in a world of madness. And whether it will pass or not, I don't know. I'm just preparing to do a series of radio podcast about American power and influence. And going right back, I've just been reading about 1898 and the Americans suddenly deciding to take the world stage and drive the Spaniards out of Cuba, and the outrageous explanation they gave for doing this. So there is a pattern to these things. But I think at the moment with Putin, with Ukraine, I think of the wars in Sudan, I think of what's going on in Africa, I think of the chaos in the United States. Yes, I do think it's a very, very unnerving time.
And going back, maybe we can jump from now then straight, because I've got 7 Story Islands to move through. We could move back to your childhood and where you started in media and understanding how the media and the world related.
Well, it came from my father, really, because he was a consummate broadcaster. And I think I sort of thought, that sounds fun. He seems to enjoy it, even though he'd been through the Second World War, which was pretty horrific. And
well, that's what I was thinking is there any relationship to that chaotic time and this chaotic time?
I think it was far less chaotic. It was far more straightforward. We had to defeat Hitler, full stop. Well, and the Italians and the Japanese. But when I was 11, they said I was 12 because you weren't allowed to broadcast at all. It was illegal if you were 11. So I was called in my 12th year. I did a radio broadcast because I was my father's son, and the BBC did a kind of chat show with records called Family Favourites on Boxing Day. And they asked my dad if I could do it. And I thought, well, this is great. I was driven up to London, and sat in the studio reading out cards and mentioning people's choice of music. And I loved it. I was hopeless at it, but I loved it. I remember somebody wrote on a card, after he'd asked for what he wanted, Fat Swallow singing something, said, P.S. I am blind. And as a 12-year-old, I kind of read this, 11-year-old, and read this, and I thought, what do we do about that bit of information? I said, blurt it out. This was live radio. oh, I'm sorry you're blind, but I'm afraid there's nothing we can do about it. So I thought the BBC was all powerful and could do anything.
Well, I was going to say, I think that idea of responsibility at, age 12, you're feeling that you were responsible for somehow helping, that was your role. Was that because you'd heard your father? Was that just because that was something in you?
I think it was just a kind of empathy, really. I mean, I just empathized. I think I'm reasonably good at empathizing. I mean, most of the work that I've enjoyed most has been trying to understand unpopular causes, unpopular people, things that are much criticized. I always find it very interesting to know why people think what they did and why they think why they do what they do. And it goes back, well, perhaps it's the wrong island to produce this on, but the thing you were quoting at the beginning, in interviewing, which I've done lots and lots of, the thing that matters in an odd way are the questions, because the questions are what are, the answers can be
but
terrible.
also I think there's a different theme. You talk, I mean, in your life, you've obviously made long form documentaries where you've gone, like in South Africa, where you've spent time in the place. You've then interviewed politicians. You've then spent, maybe this is the time to move to the second story island, holiday films. The idea of kind of meeting people and just empathizing. I think there's quite a difference, isn't there, with your approach to what your role is when you're interviewing a politician versus what your role is when you have a camera and you're meeting people.
Yeah, I can be quite. I mean, you wouldn't agree with this, but I can seem to be quite genial when talking to people about simple, like painting and their enthusiasms and things. And at other times, I have to work really hard to get information out of people. I mean, I've just finished making 3 films about the monarchy and talking to the private secretaries to the late Queen, who are really, the most careful of people, and trying to get out of them where things have gone a bit wrong, how they've gone wrong, and listening very carefully, and then getting an answer like, maybe we were a bit behind the curve on that one, which is the nearest they'll go to saying, we completely screwed up on that. So I enjoy the subtlety of questioning, really, and I genuinely like asking questions.
And when you're in the middle of those conversations, are you in that moment listening for the reveal? Have you got a thing in mind that you want to get them to reveal?
Yes, absolutely. And with this monarchy thing, I've discovered the most important question to ask when people give an answer. You ask a simple question, they give an answer. You just pause and you say, really? And then they start all over again and you get more out of them. But you have to build on the technique for all these interviews is completely different. What you're doing now is different from if I were a politician being cross-examined about what policies I've got, for financial control or something. For that, you have to listen really intently and pick up on the contradictions that are contained in the answer and poke at them until you expand them a bit. And you didn't say, the great thing, you didn't say that earlier, or didn't say that last Thursday. They're all sound cliches, but they're actually very important ways of trying to get people to answer.
Well, and I think we might jump over out of your early days. We've already gone non-linear, which is great, into Wilson, because it seems to me that is a classic case of you learning for the first time. This is a row when you interviewed Harold Wilson and you said something to him about how much he'd been paid for his book, and it caused a great furore. And it seems to me that was a very formative moment about the questions you ask and the responses they get. And then also whether the BBC as the media outlet had your back in that time. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, Harold Wilson was Labour Prime Minister way back, had been defeated in 1970, way back. And I suggested to the BBC we did a programme which used the slogan that his political party had used against the people who won the election, which was yesterday's men. i.e. the Conservative Party, or Yesterday's Men, vote Labour. They didn't. Everyone voted Conservative. So I called the film Yesterday's Men, and it was all about, it was a sort of teasing thing about it. And Wilson had been much criticised. He was still leading the Labour Party for not buckling down and opposing the Conservatives, but apparently disappearing into his study and writing his memoirs. And there was an accusation that he'd done this for the money. And I just put an innocent question, well, false innocent. Can you just set our minds at rest with how much you did earn? And he completely blew his top, completely blew his top. Where are these questions coming from? Why are you asking these questions? How do you come to this? And then he made a great fuss about it. These questions are trying to edit the film. This has got not to be shown. I'm not going to allow this. Well, he couldn't stop it being shown. But anyway, there was a blazing row with the Labour Party. And what happened then was that there was a BBC inquiry which found that the questions that I asked were perfectly fair, that there was no bias in the whole film, which was an hour long, but about Yesterday's Men. But he never forgave me, of course. But it was a, and I had touched a nerve, and I think I say in the book that it would touch a nerve because he'd used the tax device to avoid paying too much tax. There's some complicated way he'd done it, and I think he thought I knew more than I did. So he was being defensive. But it was a big.
So it was sort of an accident in a funny way. I mean, not an accident. You obviously were trying to get a response, but you weren't to anticipate the response you got.
I hadn't dreamt up the question even. I just asked it spontaneously.
Yeah.
And he blew his top. But it was a good example of the BBC at its best, really defending itself. Sometimes it gets its knickers in a twist, but here then, on this occasion, it had an inquiry. Like I say, it had one of the bureaucrats from the BBC came and questioned me in great detail about the balance of the interviews and whether the questions are fair. And anyway, it came out clean. I've got on my wall behind me here a big newspaper headline. The only time I've ever been the headline in a newspaper saying, "Carry on, Dimbleby," which was the Carry On films. Carry on, Dimbleby. So it was a baptism of fire, though, and it could have gone wrong.
Well, and you've spoken recently, we won't go into it, but you've spoken about the BBC needing to defend itself and be, strong to accusations of bias. I know that it might be a good moment to go to Question Time, actually, because I remember you saying with Question Time, Story Island, that you got as many complaints that you were biased to the right as you did to the left. Is that right?
And we always, yes. Well, the thing about Question Time is a volatile political program with a carefully established list of how often each party should be on the program during any 1 year. And so it's a what's the word? A cockpit. No, anyway, fighting cocks,
Yeah,
yeah,
I know, a bear pit.
All right, a bear pit. But everybody tries to get political advantage. So everybody complains all the time about the way they're treated. And I remember there was a wonderful moment when the Conservative Party were in great doo-doo because really just before Tony Blair became Prime Minister with a huge majority, the Tories were really out of favour, and their own supporters didn't like them, and nothing, and nothing they could say would work. And I remember we had a Tory cabinet minister on the panel, and our audiences were always balanced between Tory, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Greens, and no party. But we were very careful with the balance. And he came into this program saying, well, I've heard that you're biased against us and your audiences are all biased against us. And then the program began, and Tories in the audience began saying to him, what's the government? At the end of the program, he came out and he said, I'm sorry, I understand it. I realize everybody's now against us,
wow,
including our own people. So what was your question?
Well, I can't remember, but it was about the bias, about the accusations of bias, and that that idea that you're trying to play to both sides, and that you'll get accused of bias either way. But also, actually, I think where your reply brings us is that idea of the theatre of a live politics show, where you're bringing politicians who otherwise are sitting hidden away, or certainly were, into an environment where they have an audience that's selected deliberately as kind of representative of the population, and kind of the liveness of that environment. And again, in the spirit of serendipity, I opened up this and saw what page, the first page it opened on. And the first page was page 178. This was the theatre where real people were interacting, and where I could watch the audience's faces to see whether they were engaged or not, something much harder to discern through a camera in the gallery. I enjoyed ignoring advice. I enjoyed keeping order over an unruly mob. I enjoyed on one occasion telling a particular obnoxious audience member to leave the studio. I liked being in charge, and that weekly surge of adrenaline is what I most missed and then you left after 25 years.
All true.
That's all true. And I think that, but I've only, in you talking about it, obviously I can see the serendipity of why I've ended up running an interactive technology platform that brings the audience into the room, because there's something totally different, like live theatre, when you get this connection and relationship happening. And
I'd add to it, the theatre of politics is really important, because everybody has myriad ideas, and particularly now with social media, tend to think that their ideas are the ones that really matter, and that everybody else is mad or should be cancelled or whatever. And the idea of the theatre of politics is to recognize that there are these big differences of opinion about the way society should go and the way, things should change. And so the theatricality of politics itself is a crucial part of getting people engaged in political debate and thinking about what other people are thinking, not just sitting at home neurotically writing down what they think and throwing it out there on the internet. Just forcing people to listen, really.
And where is that happening now? Do you think that's going? Do you despair that it's been so fragmented?
At the moment, it seems to have reached quite a low level, really. I mean, particularly the way American politics is being carried out now, which seems to be a process of trying to find ruder and ruder insults to hurl at your opponents. I don't think that's conducive. In Britain, it's slightly different, but
But I was going to say, the media's relationship to that, is there a need for a kind of new form of media that somehow navigates this very complex territory? Or it's interesting, that idea we're all holding on to, well, it used to be like this, but with AI in itself totally taking over what people read and think about, with TikTok, with media platforms, social media platforms sort of being natural channels to disrupt democracy. Yeah, where does media go with that? Does it become much more important to have one-to-one storytelling? You've recently done a podcast in which you've looked at the history of democracy, Invisible Hands, which has been very successful. Do you think actually that kind of one voice to one voice is more important than ever?
I do. Whether it cuts through is another matter. I do think it's important. I mean, I don't know how much you use AI, but I've noticed I've used it on odd occasions. It's very often just plain wrong, AI. The fatuous answer that comes out. I ask a question and I just think that I'm sure that's not right. And you go a bit further and you find it's a lie. So the idea of false information goes right to the heart of AI, which everybody says is going to be so wonderful at working things out and doing things. But AI has no imagination, and it has no way, really, it seems, of knowing whether it's right or wrong. So maybe a new generation will suss this out. I mean, maybe this generation now, and I'm talking about main users of this kind of information, who seem to me to be the Gen Z and, you know, that sort of age. Maybe the next generation will kind of think how naive we all were.
Yes.
And to find it credulous, you know, that, and we'll think there's more to thought, there's more to life, there's more to imagination, there's more to belief, there's more to interest than this constant barrage of trivia and attack and counterattack. Maybe that will happen. But at the moment, I mean, if you're my age, which is sort of 110, it's quite a gloomy world to leave to you and to your children.
But I do think that's, I'm trying to find the story island that we haven't gone to, because interestingly, I think those themes of curiosity, imagination, actually the arts have been huge in your life, and you've found ways to bring them into your broadcasting, like your How We Built Britain and Picture of Britain and everything. For me, I think that might already be happening. People are already, certainly when we were at the creativity conference in LA recently with lots of video makers and graphic designers, they are all already pretty suspicious of what this promise is. And I guess maybe there's something about the understanding the digital versus the real, which takes us, which I think I'm just going to use South Africa as a way to go there, because it seems to me when you write about South Africa, it's a different experience of communication, because you're in the place and you're trying to tell a story whilst being curious. And and well, is there an alchemy there that is different to?
Yes, I mean, South Africa is, I mean, I think of it as probably the, how can I put it? The word profound is wrong, subversive, I don't know. But the point about the series of films, I must have done 6 or 7 in South Africa under apartheid. And the reason I did it was because the world outside was very puzzled why the white South Africans would not simply accept black majority rule like the white settlers in all the rest of Africa had done, the French, the Belgians, the British. And they couldn't understand it, and they couldn't seem to even get their heads around who these people were, the Afrikaner, who they were and why they wouldn't budge, and why it took years and years of violence and all that. So what I was interested in doing was trying to discover actually who these Afrikaners were, what their thought processes were, what their history was, where they were coming from, to put it simply, and to try and shift the perception of the whites in South Africa, that they weren't the white British. They were these strange Dutch, Flemish people who had arrived there in the mid-17th century and believed they were African and believed they had the right and believed they were superior. And getting under their skin we'd spent 2 or 3 years doing it and just talking to them about, you know, what it was about being an Afrikaner. And at the same time, of course, talking to black activists and going to Soweto. So we were able to, you know, being in the riots, getting tear gas, all the usual stuff. So we were able to put together a kind of picture of why it was this piece of the jigsaw wouldn't fit, that didn't fit the liberal conception that self-determination, black majority rule in Africa was the thing, right thing, and why couldn't the whites see it? We managed, I think, to show them why it was so difficult. I noticed Trump, incidentally, then when he came into office, said the Afrikaners were a persecuted minority and offered them refugee status in the United States, completely bonkers. And I think about 70 or 80 families came from South Africa to seek refuge in America because they thought they'd be safe there. False hope there. But so anyway, so finding an unpopular cause and talking about it was what was interesting.
And as a way, but it's interesting because you were presumably people might have accused you of, why should you be talking to these people? There, you know, in this day and age, you know, that idea of allowing screen time to right-wing activists.
Yes, would that be true? I suppose it is true, really. Does Tommy Robinson get screen time with people questioning him about his racism? No. I don't know. I think it was, I mean, what we were accused by the Afrikaners of having always was a liberal bias.
Right.
Smear, well, the BBC was known as smear BBC, because they smeared the Afrikaner with false information and all that. No,
Wow.
but your question is right. I think it would still pass, really.
Well, I think it's very neat. When we talk about what might come out of where we are now, it seems to me it's going to have to be dialogue and getting opposing sides talking, even if it's on social media, as a way to shift the narrative, because otherwise the narrative is owned by one monopoly,
Yes.
presumably.
But also there's an important adage, know your enemy. So if you feel very strongly about, I remember I did some interview and I was talking to a famous actress who was a political activist, very left wing. And I went to her house. She was drinking champagne and reading the Financial Times. And I said, what are you reading the Financial Times for? She said, know your enemy. It's a very important lesson. You know, if you want to have traction with your ideas, you certainly need to know what the other person's on about.
Yes.
Nobody's hurling out insults. You've got to understand where they're coming from if you're to make a dent in their way of thinking, which is what you presumably hope to do in politics or in the arts or in anything, you know.
Yes, and not sitting in your bubble. I think I'm going to get, that takes us beautifully, apparently, to Bristol. Your early experiences in Bristol after university, where interestingly one of the things you talk about is closed questions, where you asked questions and people just went yes or no, because actually you hadn't inhabited that position of curiosity, knowing understanding where people were coming from as a way to have a conversation.
I couldn't have anything to ask people. I couldn't have anything to say.
How old were you when you were living in Bristol? And this was...
it was after I'd been to university, so I must have been 22, I suppose, 23. But I remember going to my first disastrous interview. There'd been a fire at a school, at a little school in Somerset in the countryside. And I was sent to interview the headmaster. And I remember it so well. It was so embarrassing. I said, you must be very upset by this. And he said, yes. What do I ask now? I said, and you'll be raising money to rebuild the school? Yes. And you'll be looking to the parents to help, I suppose. Yes. You know, complete disaster. Yes. And what I should have said is, well, I wouldn't have said, what does it feel like? But tell me what happened and what you're going to do now, you know. But
it's an interesting thing is where
what the other person was thinking and was going to say, let them just have left with yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, and also it's the sort of where empathy stops, is you can't just go, yes, I know how you feel. Oh, yes. And it's like, you know, if you're in agreement. But I think that tension and the, obviously what you learnt through that of kind of, it feels to me that you did learn to bring the audience into the room, i.e. you were always you never were thinking about yourself and your beliefs. You were often triangulating it and thinking, what would other people want to know?
Much assisted by not having many beliefs.
Well, you say that. I mean, it's interesting. There's obviously your...
well, that's a very good repast. Well, you say that, expecting me to open up.
Because actually you do have a belief. You're over 80. I'm not going to say your age, but you are now, you're still making programs. You're still choosing things to make programs about. It's not because you have to keep on working. It must be something behind that is your belief, your drive, this is what I'm for. Yeah.
I mean, have to keep on working financially to put bread on the table. No, I don't have to keep working in that sense, but have to keep working because the work is the only thing I know, and it's what I enjoy, and my curiosity, which killed the cat, keeps me alive.
Yes,
I like working. That's why I've spent 2 years doing these films on the monarchy. It's been a long, long haul. I may get, you know, insulted and condemned by staunch monarchists or staunch Republicans. I don't know what's going to happen. But my interest in the workings of monarchy took me through 2 years' work. Now I'm starting on a podcast about the process of America emerging on the international stage at the end of the 19th century, and how it's, gone through various processes of believing it was under Kennedy, that could bring peace and calm and quiet and democracy above all, Tony Blair's fantasy, to the world, and now appears to be withdrawing, or at least clumsily trying to withdraw itself. I don't know what's going on at the moment. But anyway, so, I mean, those things interest me, yes. I mean,
well,
I wouldn't be happy pulling up the weeds in my garden.
No, because actually those themes, you say you don't have themes. It seems to me democracy, protect, the notion of democracy and how you can protect it and create discourse that enables shifts, and a belief in that and storytelling as a power for that seems to be a big theme in your life.
Yes, I'm not sure about can bring about shift. I'm never really.
Well, it was interesting because that's what you said about the room in the question time room. But again, I guess actually what you're saying about your series on the monarchy is you just never know how things are going to hit. So you have to kind of make them as true to what you're hearing as possible. That's right?
Yeah.
Wow. I think we're sort of almost at the end, but I've got a list of questions from the Stornaway team.
Okay. Far away.
And then, and we might not do all of them. I just might do a couple, which was actually the main one. Is there a documentary story or subject you feel you never resolved or would like to revisit?
I'd like to revisit almost every documentary I've made and start again at the beginning and see if I could get more out of the subject than I did get, I think is true. Because there's always more to discover. There's always things that have to be left out. And I mean, even the editing, I can't tell you this thing on monarchy. All interviews, when I started doing television, all interviews were on film, and you were lucky. I mean, I remember going to places like going to Bangladesh after a terrible hurricane and a tidal wave and interviewing people. And in order to travel light, we had 4-minute film rolls. So you could only do an interview for 4 minutes. Now, when it's all on digital and tape, all the interviews for monarchy have taken an hour or an hour and a half. I'm amazed people have the patience, but it's the new way of doing things. You just talk and talk and talk. And then you as editor take out the little bits that you think are significant. Whereas
unless you do. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say, unless you make a Story Islands like this, where you allow it to be in a confined period of time, but you try and move through pieces. And, I think
you still construct interviews like that. And they have
yes,
to discard so much. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, Stornaway's island concept is a very good one. But doing a 4-minute film.
Yes.
I mean, so often you just get the last question in and you're thinking, oh my God, the film's going to run out. The film's going to run out. I did Mrs. Gandhi when she was running to be Prime Minister in the middle of a terrible crisis in India. And they were castrating people all over India. That was her policy, to cut the birth rate. So they were forcing people to be sterilized, taking them off buses, men off buses, young men, and sterilizing them, school teachers, civil servants, everybody. And she said, oh, it's not happening. It's not done by force. And I happened to have met somebody in her own constituency to whom it had happened. And I just got the question in, and she looked kind of shocked and said, no. But I thought, oh my God, if I don't get any answer, what am I going to do? It's kind of question you can't re-answer because it's designed to shock or discombobulate. And that
brings us full circle, because I did ask myself, as your daughter, whether I was going to ask a question that, nobody else could ask. And then I quite quickly said to myself, no, I think I'll just stay and keep it respectful.
What question nobody else can ask?
I think you sort of answered it at the beginning, which is that you are uniquely a person who the public feel they know, and yet I know that they don't know you. And that how have you managed that? Like, how do you manage that sort of public private? Is it just by having a very, very large wall up, or was it not deliberate?
No, it's not deliberate at all.
Or do you feel that they do know you, or is it just that there are parts of you? And
I don't know. I have no idea what people make of me, except they seem to like the questions I ask.
That's a good answer. We're going to end with a piece of music, because actually music tells a story more than words, in my opinion. And I asked you to come up with a piece of music, bit unfair, one piece of music that felt like home. And you chose a rather abstract Bartók. What did you choose?
Unaccompanied violin sonata. It starts with wonderful. It's a wonderful, painful, discordant sounds. So much so that when I asked for it on Desert Island Discs, one of my great friends said they had to go into a cupboard and lock the door until it was over and then come out. And if you play it now, you'll understand why. It's not bringing harmony to discord. It's bringing discord to harmony.
And I think that's what, for me, just coming out of this conversation, the question I didn't ask was your ease with disharmony. Because I think to sit with people and ask questions that you know are going to hit a core in them or disturb them in some way to get a good answer requires a certain level of ease with disharmony and difficulty and not being nice all the time.
But it's human nature, isn't it? It's understanding, trying to understand human nature.
Yes, and you've always done that with a sense of curiosity rather than attack. Interesting.
Hope so.
Okay, we'll let Bartók play us out. So, trigger warning: if you get upset by discordant music, leave the building.
Get in the cupboard and shut the door.
Thank you, Dad.
Okay.